others who join. Any others who join will just make their way in. So again, welcome back from the summer and into the fall. I hope that you're able to hang on to a little bit of that summer energy and it isn't all taken away by the busyness of fall. We're going to start our time together with a bit of a word from Joanne, our presider for the region.
Hi, I thought that this being the season of creation, that it would be a good time to just have like a call to worship, a benediction, and a story to get us in that mood. So if I can share my screen, Maurizio, that'd be great. Can everyone see that?
Yes, yes.
Now I remember I was thinking as I was preparing this over Zoom, oh yeah, it's been a while since I've done worship over Zoom, and remember that call and response is not that great because of the sound. So if everyone but Trina could mute, and I'll do the red and she can lead in the black, and anybody, you can choose either or all of it. Just make sure you're muted so that we don't have talking over each other. That was the best thing I found about meeting in person again, is being able to talk over each other without buzzing. And so we begin. We come rejoicing in God's creation.
God is good. The fruit-laden trees proclaim the wonder of God.
We come rejoicing in God's creation.
God is good. The autumn rain declares the nurture of God.
We come rejoicing in God's creation.
God is good. The mountains and hills reflect our awesome God.
We come rejoicing in God's creation.
God is good. The gathered crops make evident our caring God.
And as you can see, that was a call to worship prepared by David Sparks in Summerland, BC. And I just want to give a shout out to the Gathering online resource. If you don't have it, get it. You can search and find things. It's a wonderful resource. And as part of that, this next story was also from the Gathering. But this picture that you see on the screen, I was in Quebec City with my daughter. She goes to Concordia, so I went out there with her. And in the Museum of Civilization, there was this table set. The idea being that everyone deserves a place at the table. I mean, I love saying that. I always just think of people. But this really demonstrates that everybody, including the pests, as they would say there in the write-up, there's a raven at the back. You know, you have the wasp's nest. On the other side of the table is the skin of a snake. We have the growth in the middle of the table. The idea that everyone has a place at the table means all, including our plant and animal and sea creatures. So this story, also recognizing that September 30th is the National Day of Reconciliation. This story, also from the Gathering, is called Grandmother's Creation Story, and it's by Muskeke Isque, Sharon John Creek. She's a medicine healing woman. And someone put this on saying this is a story her grandmother, Victoria White Wolf, used to tell her. Here is her story. Long ago, the Creator looked out over the perfect world Creator had made, at the oceans, mountains, plains, deserts, lakes, and rivers, and Creator was pleased. Creator looked upon the plants and trees and was happy at what they saw. Still, Creator felt there was something missing. There was no movement, nothing to enjoy the beauty Creator had created. So they created the animals, birds, creepers, and fish. They made them in all sizes, forms, colors, and shapes. As Creator watched them roam over Mother Earth, enjoying the beauty of the creations, Creator was pleased with all that had been done. Life continued on, Mother Earth in perfect balance and harmony. Many moons passed, and one day the animals, birds, creepers, and fish called out to their Creator, We thank you for all that you have given us, for all the beauty that surrounds us. However, everything is so plentiful that we have nothing to do but wander here and there with no purpose to our lives. The Creator gave great thought to their request. After a while, he showed himself again to his creations. Creator told them he would give them a weaker creature to take care of, to look after and teach. This creature would not be so perfect as Creator's other creations. It would come upon Mother Earth weak, small, and knowing nothing. So the Creator made humanity, and all Creator's other creations were happy. Now they truly had purpose in life, to care for these helpless humans, to teach them how to find food and shelter, and to show them the healing herbs. The humans, under the care of all, multiplied and grew to be many. Still, the animals, birds, creepers, and fish took care of them. As the humans became stronger, they demanded more and more from their brothers and sisters. Finally, there came a day when a human demanded more food than he needed, and the animal would not grant him his request. The man, in great anger, picked up a rock and killed the animal. From the dead animal, the man discovered that he could use the meat to feed himself and the skin to cover his body. The bones, claws, and teeth would be his trophies to show the other humans that now he was as smart as the animals. When he showed these things to the other humans, in their greed to have all that he had, they started killing all their animal brothers around them. The Creator watched them all, humans, animals, birds, creepers, and fish. Finally, Creator called the remaining animals, birds, creepers, and fish to himself. Creator told them that they had decided to take them all to his spirit home and leave the humans to rule over Mother Earth for a period of time until they recognized the error of their ways. The animals, knowing that the humans could not survive without them, begged the Creator to take pity on their human siblings. Because the animals showed compassion and pity for ones weaker and less wise than themselves, the Creator listened to their pleas. Because you are good and have followed my ways, I will grant you your prayer. To protect you, I will no longer allow you to speak with humans or guide and protect them. I will make you afraid of them so that you will no longer approach them. I will create a spirit animal to represent each of you, and to this spirit animal I will grant one gift that he may use. If a human lives in a good and kind way and follows my path, they may ask me for one of my spirit animals to guide and keep them on my path. This spirit animal will only come to humans who have a good heart. And so today, we seek our spirit keepers to learn how to be as kind and wise as our animal siblings. In seeking them, we wish to learn how to please the Creator as the animals did before us. And that is found on the website Return to Indigenous Peoples Literature, compiled by Glenn Welker, and also on our Gathering website. It just reminds us that all of life is sacred and all we have belongs to Creator. So we'll finish with this benediction.
May Christ, who shimmers in all creation, surprise you each day with glittering moments. When you can see again how light lives in everything, how it partners with dark soil to bring forth aster and lavender, rosemary and daffodils, 100 kinds of squash, kale and cabbage, apple and berry, grapes sweetened by the sun. How the dough you knead in your hands is an alchemy of touch and time. How everything is a call to communion. The wafer of moon, a chalice of stars. Let the mystery of it all dance in your heart, always widening your horizons, inhabiting new landscapes. May you know each moment as sacred, and everything around you a call to remember this one true thing.
May we all live into that knowledge. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Joanne. That was beautiful. I always find that we have really great experiences when we come together at our general meeting and we have the opportunity to learn from the wisdom of our speaker. And then we go off into the summer and into our lives. And when we get to the fall, we're some distance away from that experience. But I just thought as we come into the fall that it would be great to reconnect with Cameron so that we can mine and bring to the forefront of our mind some of what we experienced at that meeting so that it can be informing our work and our energy and our thoughts as we engage in the work of the fall. So I've asked Cameron to come back and spend a bit of time with us today. So without further ado, I'll just turn things over to her because she's who you came to listen to.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you all again. And Trina, anytime Trina asks of anything of me, I'm always honored, and it's an easy yes, because I know we're going to have fun together. Joanne, you nailed the presentation. So I think we should all just sign off with a big group hug, because that was just glorious and actually goes right to the heart of kind of what I wanted to talk about. So when we were together, we spent some significant time kind of playing with futuring and futuring the church, futuring the world, just playing in that imaginal space of, how does one develop the capability of examining the stories we tell ourselves about the future, and then determining which stories we want to actually inform or animate our lives. And so we realized together that every one of us has stories going on in our minds about the future. And those stories are, on some days when we're feeling good, really positive and optimistic stories. And they impact like how risky we want to be in our lives, or how who we partner with, or where we make investments, or who we associate with, etc. And then we could have some bad days, and we might be telling ourselves really negative stories about the world or ourselves, and so that impacts how we kind of operate in the world. And all of those stories have legitimacy. They're all possible because nobody owns the future. It hasn't happened yet. But most of us operate unconsciously in that storytelling. And so we take on stories that are given to us, and or we create stories that are unexamined, but still have consequence in our daily lives, in the present moment. So I gave the example of, if I think that the economy is in terrible shape and, we're all headed into recession, then I might not make certain investments, or I might start to hoard my resources, or feel, a sense of scarcity. But if I tell myself the story that, my gosh, we've survived incredible disruptions to our economy and we're really doing really, really well. And actually, it might be bumpy at the moment, but on the whole, it's all going to be fine. And, then it changes the way that I might invest, or I might give, or I might, my sense of generosity and abundance in my space. Both stories there's data to support either one, but it's just a question of how much do I want to lean into and actualize these stories. So I would like to kind of continue on that theme. And when we were together, it was sort of on the sidelines. So a couple of times we had public comments about how much we all loved the book Braiding Sweetgrass. And I was so bold even to say, if if I got to be God for the day, what I think I would do is just erase or take away all of the things we call the Holy Bible, and I would replace it with Braiding Sweetgrass as our sacred text, for the world, because I just think it's got a holism, a depth of spiritual wisdom in it that's needed for exactly this moment. So, Joanne, that you started with a creation story that is countercultural in a sense to the creation story that comes from the Christian tradition, or one of the creation stories that comes from the Christian tradition, I think is an interesting coincidence. And for those of us who I couldn't take notes fast enough, if there's a chance, you can post a link into the chat. I would personally really love that. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're just going to geek out on kind of exploring the future of spirituality. And let me just ask, is the screen showing up for you, and is it in decent proportion? Okay, very good. So as we're playing around in this, again, the stories that we're telling ourselves matter. And we remember in Braiding Sweetgrass, she starts the book with the story of Sky Woman Falling, which is another indigenous story, a creation story that talks about, a woman falling from the sky world and is carrying this basket of seeds from the tree of life from the sky world. And she falls, and the geese see that she's falling. And so the geese fly up and hold her, in essence, so fly around with her on their backs until they get tired. And then they realize they can't keep this up. And so they call a council of the animals, and the turtle surfaces and says, well, she can stand on my back, on my shell. And then they realize she needs land to live on. And so they think, what are we going to do about this? And so they work together. And ultimately, it's the little muskrat who is able to dive deeply enough into the sea and pulls up dirt. And in her gratitude, because the muskrat gives his life to do this, she begins dancing. And in her gratitude, in the dance and the play and the celebration of that moment, the mud begins to spread, and it becomes land, and things shift from being brown to being green. And then over time, all of the animals and Sky Woman have plenty, enough to eat. There's an abundance that is created on the earth from the interdependence, the way in which everything is woven together in a relationship that's founded on gift and gratitude. I mean, it's a really extraordinary story. And then, of course, in our tradition, there are multitudes of ways to read and remember our creation stories. But when we start with the story of Adam and Eve, the most common telling of that story is as the expulsion from the garden, right? And so we begin with humanity coming from the earth, like from the dust, that God breathed ruach, breathed life into us. But in that act of expulsion, that act of rebellion and getting kicked out of the garden, there became a separation from humanity and the rest of creation. And so we have this line, go forth and subdue the earth, or dominate the earth, is how we've interpreted it. It's a really destructive interpretation of that. But what it, in a sense, has created is a story that we're telling ourselves as a culture, that we have been, that essentially says we're not of the earth, we're on the earth, almost as if we're like these alien forms that got placed on the planet, but our relationship to nature, to each other, to the animals, to all of those beautiful connections that are illustrated in Sky Woman, and then in the story that Joanne read us, those get ignored, they get subjugated, they get repressed, and it creates a story then that justifies a lot of the dangerous and disruptive things that are happening right now in our culture. And so when we were together, we spent some time looking at, don't judge my graphic design inabilities here, but we can hopefully this communicates. But we spent some time talking about the tension that we're living in right now between competing stories, in essence. A story that at least in Western context, and I think we could make an argument for a global one too, that we're living at the archetypal level. The story we've adopted for ourselves is one based in hierarchy, and ultimately that's getting lived out in current context as a story of patriarchy as the dominant kind of power structure. And that then gets translated as a toxic masculinity and violence that hurts both men and women. This is not about male or female. It's about a kind of the way that we're using and abusing power in our systems. And then because of that, it drives out our values and beliefs. And so white supremacy becomes a necessary byproduct of a hierarchical system, because we need a way to kind of understand who has power and who doesn't. Capitalism becomes a kind of a predictable economic system, because it's based on competition and in us versus them, which leads to a mindset, an individual mindset of I have to compete against you in order to succeed in life, right? So pull ourselves up by the bootstrap, or we want to be self-made, these kinds of things, and so whoever has the most toys wins, in that kind of mindset. That's really a very strong subdue the earth kind of approach, right? A way of justifying a kind of form of violent culture that has I hope I'm not naive in saying this, and I'm often quite naive, but I hope it has taken us as far as it can take us, and it is insufficient to take us further if we want to survive on this planet, right? That we've actually reached the point of creating an existential hard line, where between our capacity to create nuclear proliferation and blow ourselves up literally, and then alternatively climate change, we're facing the very real reality of our own destruction. As philosopher Jean Houston says, we've developed the capacity to destroy ourselves without the wisdom to know not to do so. So we need a new story, a new operating framework by which we understand what it means to be human. How do we live our lives and relationship to ourselves and our inner integrity and authenticity, and relationship to God, and then relationship to each other and all of creation. And so it could be that an alternative story is emerging at some scale, and it has the contours of interdependence and a pluralistic, everyone belongs kind of energy that values or the environment. So it has an eco-civilization, a balanced and sustainable way of living on the earth. And it's contemplative in the sense that it rewards the maturation of the human soul. So it rewards the deep spiritual work that is an option in the human experience. It's not everybody chooses to do that work, but those of us who claim ourselves people of faith take on that internal reflection. And our leadership, what we create in the world, what we invest in the world, becomes a byproduct of that contemplative discipline, that contemplative journey that happens within us, right? So who we are becomes the byproduct of what we do in that space. So we're living, kind of wrestling out these kinds of competing stories. And so it creates predictable tensions. And they define the stories by which we imagine our futures. So I wanted to play in that kind of space of, what are the futures that we could imagine in the religious space? And I spend a lot of time geeking out about this. And as it turns out, there's a whole now line of academia called futuring, or futures literacy. And so for the next little bit, we're going to think like a futurist. And so we'll walk through kind of the imaginal process that's required in that. And what I'm going to tell you is my reflections. There, take them or leave them. I'm not even sure I believe in what I'm about to say, but or it changes and shifts as I'm learning more and discerning more. So I really do value your instincts and insights here as we're all trying to discern together where all of this is going. So over the next, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes together, we're going to go through these 4 stages. So what I'm going to try to do is identify key trends that have impact on our future as a whole, but on spirituality in particular. I want to identify pinpoints of uncertainty around which, like, if this happens, then these futures become probable, or if this happens, then these other futures become probable, right? So what are the pivot points that matter that we should keep our eyes on as culture continues to develop as it is? We'll build out a framework together, and then we'll kind of flesh out those narratives. So if we think about trends, and we need a frame in order to think through those, we might use, I mean, the world is made a darker and more simpler place every time we create an acronym, but here I go. So this is how I kind of remember how to think about trends. So it's the acronym STEEP. So if we think, what are the social cultural trends that are active right now that have impact that we should pay attention to, that are shaping and reshaping how we understand ourselves as humans? What are the technological advances or devolutions? You know, how is technology operating in our context? What are the economic realities and the economic shifts that are happening here that have some impact on the stories we might tell about our future? What's happening environmentally, and especially particularly in our case around climate change and our response to it. And then what are the political realities that may fundamentally reshape how we organize ourselves in culture and how we relate to each other, particularly at the value level? Like, what do we value collectively, and then how do we divide ourselves into groups, and how does power move among us because of those values? So if I had to be incredibly simplistic, but to try to get at some of those trends that I think are things we should be paying attention to at large scale, that are impacting us at across all industries, but spirituality certainly being one of them, is that at the social and cultural level, we're really in the early days and stages of a crisis of truth, and what is a fact and what is fake news, and in that, what it's granting access, or what it's granting the sort of the playing field for, is a radicalization of ideologies. So when we don't know who to believe or what to believe, we've got a real problem at the social cultural level. And at the moment, we don't have sufficient tools or methodologies to sort that out. So it's a real moment of ambiguity in a trend that is going to, I think, really profoundly over the next 10 to 20 years, really, really strongly impact who we follow and what we believe, and where we invest. On the technological level, like right now, I'm presenting to you using an AI tool that is, and I left it up on the screen so you can see, beautiful AI creates PowerPoint presentations for us, essentially. But the impact of augmented reality and artificial intelligence is, I think, most technologists will say, over the next even 2 years, the shifts that we're going to see in the workplace and how you and I use technology is going to be stunning. Most of the technologists that I speak to right now say, buckle your seatbelts, because the rate at which this technology is coming online is unprecedented. Every day there are new tools being released and data being entered into these spaces that has real impact, which leads to the likelihood that our lives, how we interact online with each other, how we shop, how we form community, what we get exposed to as far as information, what we have access to, the videos that we watch, our entertainment sources, etc., are driven by algorithms. And so our worlds, our bubbles begin to get formed by calculations made by large data sets that are formed that then tell us who we are and what we like. And that is, you know, a shift. I won't articulate an opinion of how I feel about that, but that's a pretty significant shift, leading to the possibility that you and I can do things like rate each other at the social level. So it might be, you know, I could go online and say, you know, she's a 6 on the trustworthy scale. So you know, if you're thinking of doing business with her, I'm not sure I would do that. Or, you know, he's an 8 in his ability to make things happen, right? So we can open and close doors and access to people based on these algorithmic calculations. So huge shifts there. When we think about at the economic level, what we're seeing in a trend set is that there's nothing on the horizon to suggest that the wealthy will not continue to get more and more wealthy, that gap will not continue to grow. And with that growth, if that trajectory or that trend continues, then what it will mean is that ultimately nonprofit work, congregations to some extent, but certainly our humanitarian aid, like global humanitarian aid work, our do-goodery work, if I can call it all of that, will no longer be funded in large scale by government entities, but instead by corporate entities or by extremely wealthy individuals. So the kind of imagination that's currently financially investing into a lot of the social common good infrastructure that many of us are bought into will, if the trend continues, actually be funded by spaces that have not traditionally been known to play in that space. So what will that mean for congregational life, for denominational life in our countries here? Of course, climate change, I won't spend a lot of time on, but, you know, we can predict that migration is going to increase. Access to fresh water is going to drive a lot of people to not be able to live in certain places. And the mass extinction of a lot of different species is going to have a radical impact on how we survive, how we end up navigating this. And then if we look at the political space, what we're seeing across the globe right now as a trend is, we might say, the rise of authoritarianism, but the destabilization of nation states, where the political systems are dysfunctional at the very, very least, we could say, and may become non-functional if that trend continues, unless there's some sort of disruptive influence that comes into. But if we continue again on current trends and trajectories. So those are kind of like the traditional ones, but then we might, for our purposes, add a couple more, because there's some questions at the existential level and kind of the religious level. You know, what are the trends that are happening there? And if I think about the existential level, the loneliness epidemic that is taking root, particularly in Western cultures, is at trend level, is a significant cultural trend that is deeply impacting our sense of investment in culture and our sense of value as human beings, as contributing members of family units, of communities, and of a wider nation state mindset. That there's nothing on the horizon at the moment to suggest that that's going to shift, though of course it needs to be of particular concern for us. And then if I look at just the religious, like institutional religious space or the theological space, then what seems clear at the moment is that we've got a tension between the extremists and the what I'm calling right now kind of the universalists. There's a wonderful young academic whose name, let me get for you, is Cassidy Steele Dale. So if you want to Google her, And she's written a piece where she talks about of the two kind of religious mindsets that are operating right now. There are the knights, and the knights see the world as a place where we're battling. It's a battle between good and evil, and there's a righteousness or a righteous group of people, and then there's everyone else, and it's a defensive position, where heaven and hell are deeply operational, and you're trying to win souls over to the right side, to the good side. And you're rewarded. The whole reward system is based upon your ability to compete, to be combative in that space. And then she says there are people who are like gardeners, and we're and I would count us, probably most of us, in that space. And the gardeners are those who tend to relationships, tend to community cohesion, tend to equality and justice, and those kinds of more sensitive, soft skills, if you will, of a culture, and don't see this world as a combative, right or wrong kind of place, but as a very complex gray in between the black and white kind of space, but who see change happening over time because of the investment we make kind of in cultivating this garden of diversity. And so we've got these kind of extreme mindsets that are operating here, and operating at some scale, with possibly the extremists better able to scale than we might be in that. So if we think about that kind of at the high level trends, then, what does that mean? How do we kind of understand, what matters? Like, those are a lot of trends. There are a lot of big ideas, but what actually matters if we're trying to think about the future of spirituality? So here's where I'm still working out my thinking, but I want to know what you think here. So I want you to imagine, kind of, well, actually, I'll give you a slide here. I'll just fast forward here. So let's think of this as like quadrants, and on the vertical or the horizontal axis here, think of that as an axis of belonging, because I think one of the key questions for the future of spirituality, and maybe the future of humanity, is, will we seek out greater connection and belonging to each other and greater community, or will we become more isolated and move further apart from each other, right? So, or will we, individualism kind of go on the rise? So will we seek greater connection and belonging, or will we seek less connection and belonging? And then if we think about the vertical axis, this is where, again, we'll have to think together on this, but I think what actually matters out of all of the trends are, does the social and cultural fabric hold together, or does the social and cultural fabric fall apart, right? So do we move closer together and live in a cultural reality or a cultural context that feels interwoven, and there's high level of trust, and neighbors know neighbors, and families are functional, and government serves, in healthy kinds of ways, or the opposite? We could have a social and cultural fabric that rips apart, where laws become ignored, there's no accountability, there's an erosion of trust. We may see, collapse of nation states in that space. And on the more positive descriptor of that all falling apart, there's, kind of a freedom to reimagine how we might organize ourselves socially and culturally. But the rules of the game are unknown, right, in that space where we fall apart, in essence. So I think if we're paying attention as futurists, thinking about the future of spirituality, we care about those two things. How close are we in relationship to each other, and how stable is the context in which we're serving? Does this make sense? Right? So let me tell you, let me just keep developing the idea, and let's see if this kind of resonates. So let's say that there's a future, and now none of these futures are right or wrong, right? This is all imaginal, but let's just play in the space. And again, I'm just trying to show us a way of thinking about futures. But let's say that we're actually imagining now a future where we're less connected, there's less belonging, and the social and cultural fabric doesn't hold, where it falls apart. So probably in that kind of future, what we're looking at is a sense of retrenchment, because we're living now in an unpredictable and likely unsafe environment. So we can, in that space, what would be probably a safe assumption is that we would have a very low or no trust in our institutions, our community leaders, or our neighbors. So our sense of belonging then goes to kind of our clan structures, whether it's the people we're born to, or chosen family, or a, you know, kind of vetted community. So our connections become very small and very localized, and spirituality in this space would likely become very polarized. So we're seeing the gardeners and the knights most actively here. So some become defenders of the righteous, while others actually could invent entirely new spiritualities. They give them some sense of comfort and meaning in the disorientation of the collapse of their social net or social sphere, and feeling disconnected from others. But what could also be true, oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button, is that we are less connected, are seeking less connection and belonging, but our social fabric holds together. And that is an interesting conundrum, because that's probably pretty ripe for authoritarianism, for the rise of these kind of I alone can save us kind of superhero figures that could come to the forefront. And so without a sense of connection to, and of community and neighbors, and even a connection internally to our own sense of the meaning of our lives, then because we're meaning-making creatures, we might turn to exterior sources for that. So a person who stands up and says, here's the way life will be, would be of great comfort in a place where, you know, we are looking for some sense of how we connect. So spirituality can become a tool of the state and national oppression, where social cohesion comes at the price of control and conformity. But we could also imagine that if we're seeking greater connection and belonging, and the social fabric holds, that's actually kind of the moderates win. That might be a future that looks a lot like the present, where we're continuing to make iterative changes as a culture. And so congregational life might, we might see, you know, sort of the continued of secularization and shrinking congregations, et cetera. But we're not experiencing revolution per se. You know, it's just a slow iterative change as we're trying to sort out all of these places where we're discordant, you know, sort of negotiating those stories that we're telling ourselves. And then another possibility is we seek greater connection and belonging, but the social fabric collapses and falls apart. And that's where we're ripe for revolution, and a sense of we're all in this together because of that that discordant social reality. So spirituality in that world could become a counterbalance to the disorientation and social disruption, and might invite a reimagining of these stories that we're telling ourselves. We would maybe seek greater connection with each other, but around basic needs, the meeting of basic needs. So we might see congregations serving as community hubs, or you know, places where resources are distributed, like food and water and, you know, shelter, very basic kinds of things, because our social fabric is disrupted. And so in that way, we might experience, you know, kind of a return to practical practices and patterns of daily life, as we're sort of finding our way through remaking a society where the connection holds, where our sense of the common good holds in place. Now, none of these are particularly right or wrong, but if those are the two kind of key questions that we're wondering about, will we seek greater connection and belonging, or less connection and belonging? And will we live in a reality of a destabilized social culture, or will our political systems, et cetera, or all our institutional systems hold together? Will that fabric hold together even though, sometimes it feels like we're right on the brink. I think I would just wonder if those aren't the two kind of pivot points that congregations, that all of us need to keep our eyes on. And if that's true, then what does that mean for congregations? Like, what do we do here? So I'll just go through this kind of quickly. But in a retrenched kind of world, then congregations become places where safety can be assured and we're meeting basic needs. We'd be smaller communities. Again, we'd have these kind of extreme ideologies that would be operational. And if you remember the kind of the framework of belong, believe, behave, in this space, we would belong to each other. And that belonging would be animated by a certain set of beliefs about how dangerous the world is and how we need to stay together to protect ourselves and those we love. And because we believe those things about the world, then we will behave in certain ways. We'll have certain responsibilities, certain jobs, certain values, etc., that animate our behavior. In a repressed environment, so think authoritarianism or some sort of non-democracy or democratic worldview kind of there, then what congregations end up doing is serving as a firewall. They serve as a countercultural force in that. But interestingly, in that frame, people who associate with countercultural communities, as in congregations, put their personal safety at risk when that countercultural narrative becomes too countercultural, when it pushes against that authoritarian messaging. So when it also might mean that people will be migrating more, because when we see our political systems kind of collapse in, then we need to find like-minded people with whom we can safely live. And so migration would kick up there. Again, this one would be believe, behave, belong. So we believe in the one who can save us, and the messaging around that. We behave by being complicit or being cooperative with that messaging, and then that determines our belonging. If we don't behave and believe in the right ways, we will never belong. Then the reform, again, is of the status quo. It would be kind of what we can see coming as an obvious probable future for our congregations now. But in this, what we would probably see, secularization continues, but churches increasingly, or congregations, become these kinds of circles of sanity, places where our values and our theological embodiment, the way that we live out this Christian way, gets lived out together in community in ways that are life-giving, and that we're developing compassion or empathy, a sense of empathy for one another in the shared common good. There, we're looking at belonging is our core value. Like, we want to be together first and foremost. And in our belonging, we determine the behaviors that support that belonging, that nurture our connection to each other. And then from that, we decide what beliefs serve the belonging, right? Serve our connection to each other. And we're willing to let go of beliefs that have historically been doctrinal, if they're not in service to that sense of community and connection there. And then if we live in a revolutionized reality, then what we've got is the potential to break open the story. So maybe a new narrative of community and meaning, meaningful life emerges. We can reweave the relationship with the natural world, which could also happen in reform. The congregations become circles of sanity, refuge, and creativity. And again, it's a behave, or we behave together, we practice together in certain ways, and in that practicing of those ways, we belong. And then belief becomes kind of the last piece of that. Just a couple more slides and then I will stop. So how do we build congregations to serve the future that we wish to see? Because again, all of these are possible futures, and there are probably 10 more possible futures, but what does this practically mean? So if we're leading congregations today, what is it that we need to nurture in our spaces? in a multitude of ways, all driven by your context. So it would be all kinds of, wonderful, fabulous ideas. But here are the places where we want to double down. We really want to invest. If we want to build a world where connection and belonging is increased, which probably we'd all be on the same boat on that one, then what would be necessary for that is that we invest in acts and in environments, creating environments where trust and safety are increased. Because the absence of trust locks down our system's ability to grow, to create, to be imaginative, to be generative. The absence of trust is what leads to the erosion of institutions and the lack of collaboration, and leads to the competition. What we're seeing right now, as we talked about when I was there together, is that there's an absence of trust at almost every level of institutional religion, in every denomination. So, many of the national leaders don't have a whole lot of trust in the regional leaders. Many local congregations don't have a whole lot of trust in the regional leaders or the national leaders. Many congregants don't have a whole lot of trust in religious leaders ever, period, or many people who don't have any association with congregations don't have a lot of trust in religious leadership, etc. So the absence of trust means that we can't change, we can't evolve, we can't really work together. So if we can amplify that, I would say that's actually probably one of that and community are the two top priorities, the most important investments that we can make. Adrienne Marie Brown says in her book, Emergent Strategies, she says, change moves at the speed of trust. So as we want to evolve together, and we might even, I would adapt that to say transformation moves at the speed of trust. So if we want to evolve together, our ability to trust one another is an essential currency that has to be in place. With sufficient trust in place, then we can build community and connection. It will hold, because the absence of trust means that I'm granting you trust until you break it. But over time, we can earn trust between each other, and that builds sustainable community. And that's the relational fabric at the moment that is so frayed in most of our settings. So our sense of connection was really tested during the pandemic, and now in the political tensions that we're seeing, across so many of our spaces, that our sense of belonging to each other and our sense of safety in that belonging to each other is being eroded in ways we've never seen before in human history. And so what is subversive about our work, and why it's so very important that congregations function in ways that reweave that relational fabric, is because that reweaving of that relational fabric then helps our communities raise the standard of life for the people living in them. That makes life better. It creates the conditions for a more just world. And so our principal concern as congregations right now really should be around this trust and community connection. But that said, we also have to balance that with a sense of authenticity, which may have been abandoned by some of our movements, as in the 1950s and 60s, we began to adopt performative expressions of shallow faith, I might call it. And we've allowed behaviors that are incongruent with the values we claim to hold. So there's an authenticity, a believability that has been eroded, that with its reestablishment would make a material difference, a significant difference in people's willingness to join in the community and in their sense of safety and trust with us. And then finally, the way we'll know we're succeeding is that we'll see a burst of creativity from our congregations. And what I want to say is, I'm a UCC pastor in the United States, but as a semi-outsider watching you all, the level of liturgical creativity that is present in the United Church is so inspiring to so many of us. So the ways in which you all are producing liturgy, and I mean, what we just witnessed that Joanne brought to us, the beautiful way in which we're reframing the world in the creative way that we're now wanting to see what is so. That is a byproduct of our sense of connection to each other and to nature, our sense of trust and safety in our relationships, and in our relationship to God and to creation. And it comes out of an authentic place of genuine resilience and creativity there and vulnerability. So the explosion of creativity is what we're really looking for in all of this. So that was a big old geek session, wasn't it? So we know with all 5 minutes remaining, I'm wondering, any reflections or any thoughts about, or I don't know, what do you all want to do?
Can you stop your screen share so
Well,
we can
keep picking.
see some faces? So if
Mark-
anyone has questions, we've got Mark. You can just unmute yourself. Mark Dudkotsky. You have your hand raised.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yeah, you were muted.
Okay, and here's the scary part. Can you see me now?
We can't see you. We can hear you though.
Okay, that's a good thing, Hank. Okay. First of all, I really enjoyed your talk this time as well as during the regional meeting. I'd like to exchange some emails with you in the future because a lot of what you're saying is I feel is being presented as though, oh, look out if this keeps going on, or look out if this happens, like destabilization of nations, climate change. That's always been going on, okay? And we seem to have survived it quite well. Like the collapse of the Soviet Union, most people have seen that, and we still seem to get by. Climate change, the big issue there, as far as I'm concerned, isn't climate change. It's wading through all the hubris to find out what information is actually valid. You mentioned about the technology, how the big change. For as long as I remember, people have always been saying, oh boy, the future is going to be changing, and even more so at a rapid rate, exponentially. That's always been happening. The futurists, for as long as I can remember, anytime I listen to a futurist make predictions of big change, it's never even been close. I remember stories starting as TV series like Here Come the 70s. No laughs, please. I also remember predictions of what things are going to be like in 1984. That was a big thing. And then again in 2000, what the world is going to be like. And most futurists, if they want to make predictions of small changes, okay, but any big changes they predict, I've never been able to find them very accurate. The stress, I think that we can go on a lot about the future. I feel that the declining of the church membership is because we're not doing a good enough job convincing people of the importance of spirituality as a starting spot. How we get to them is another, but I think that a lot of it has to do with what's been seen in the media, and what's on TV is really eroding the benefits of spirituality, and I think that would be a really good place to start.
Yeah.
I can go on and on.
Yeah, you could, I suspect.
Okay. we'll let Cameron reply here.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Mark, I don't know that I totally disagree with anything. I mean, I think your observations are interesting and valid. What I should maybe clarify, just so we're speaking the same language, is that what we're not trying to do here is predict the future. This is not a predictive model in a sense, right? What we're trying to do is play in the imaginal space of what kinds of futures are we creating, and how do we discover the contours or the pivot points that we want to either at least be conscious of, or perhaps even shift, to actively work towards. So this is not about like I'm going to guess what the world looks like in the future and, guess way off or out of alignment. This is about playing in a kind of an imaginal space using trends that we can see today, and in a sense, kind of forecasting probable futures and possible futures that also reveal desirable ones.
I'll let
So,
other people have their chance.
thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So MPT, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much, Cameron, for your presentation. I enjoyed it, and you raised very important points for me regarding maybe the future of the church. If I may ask, if you have any idea what makes us not to trust each other, while yet we are Christians and we're supposed to be there for one another and try to live up to scripture and live up to ourselves in order to create an inclusive community for me. Secondly, I've realized that it looks like we have watered down our faith and it is very shallow. How do we go back and try to rebuild our faith if there's a question like that? And finally, I come from a background, or rightly speaking, I come from Botswana in Africa. And when it comes to liturgy and worship, we are more interactive, we are more spontaneous, we are more inclusive, we are more contemporary, and we try to address the needs of a wider congregation, the seniors, the middle-aged, the young people, and the children, and we want them to get out of the church on Sunday morning with something to take home. Why isn't our liturgy trying to address such spiritual, if you will, needs of our communities? Thank you very much.
Well, I hope we can all stay on another hour. Those are really good questions. So thank you for asking that. Can we take a few more minutes, Trina?
Yeah, so some folks may need to step away, and if they do, we'll just give you a blessing on your way as you do that. And those of us who can hang around for a while. So
Yeah.
we'll just proceed.
So you've asked a really important question on why is trust eroding? What has happened with trust? And we could maybe approach that from two different directions, because I think in one reality, the institutions that we've created and the cultural story that we've adopted they were never designed to include the level of diversity and the pace of change that we are currently seeing in our world today. So they were built in a different age, at a different time, when globalization didn't really exist. There wasn't that kind of reality where the kinds of access and technology and ways that we cross-pollinate now today were not really possible. And so we're now trying to take institutions designed for a previous era and ask them to do things they are not designed to do, which is to embrace cultural stories that are incoherent or that are complicated or that are nuanced in our cultures. We're trying to, build in diversity in all kinds of different ways. And actually, they're not designed to allow power to move that way, to allow equality to exist in the ways that we're now wishing to do, right? And in that dysfunction of our systems, what it creates then is a sense of, I don't belong, I'm not seen, I'm not valued, or my story is better than your story, is more important than your story, my priorities are more important. And so there's this kind of working its way out in our system of realizing many of the institutions that have brought us this far are not big enough, are not inclusive enough, are not dynamic enough and agile enough to organize us in a coherent way to move us forward. So we're losing trust in each other, as I would say, a byproduct of the dysfunction of kind of the systems and cultural support infrastructure that we've had in place. So that's point number one. But point number two, which you I think really nailed beautifully, is that if I am not trustworthy, if I can't trust myself as a person, then I cannot ask you to trust me. And one of the gifts of our faith is that it creates a certain maturation of our integrity, of our sense of authenticity, of our sense of wholeness in ourselves. And do you all remember Robert Blythe? He was a poet. He died in the last couple of years, but he wrote a book called The Sibling Society, where he said, basically what we're doing is creating a world that rewards adolescent behavior, that we're not creating grown-ups in a sense. And he located that challenge in that we're not maturing in our own being, in our own sense of self, and in deepening our own faith practices, et cetera, that are the practices that create that for ourselves. In that way, we are untrustworthy as wisdom bearers in the culture. And that's, if a religious leader is anything, surely we are wisdom bearers, right? So the internal work, the meditation, the prayer, the practices, the sort of the way of life that we say we belong to, that way has a way of creating that maturation in us when we follow that path with great intentionality. But for most of us, life distracts us, or we have different values, or we make different choices. And in that way, we are not trustworthy, right? We can't trust our own selves in order to live the values that we claim to have. And therefore we become untrustworthy to those who are with us, who are following us, or with whom we're having community. So it's a real interesting conundrum. I'm remembering the quote of Karl Rahner, who was a Catholic priest, and he said, if the Christian is to have a future, he or she will be a mystic. And by that, I think what he meant was that he or she will have a vibrant faith life, and a faith life that leads to those kinds of portals of access to wisdom that make us trustworthy sources of discernment and of the way that God is moving and living and having God's being with us. Again, others might have responses, but I see the erosion of trust happening in those two principal spaces, and they're of course always connected. You also ask about liturgy, but that feels like a very big question too. So I might let others address that at another time.
There's some questions in the chat. So one from Julia that says, will our scriptures be adequate for creating a new vision for the future, taking into consideration how the Bible has been historically used? Can scripture be rehabilitated enough to be useful for reimagining the future?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think I have to answer it gently, because what we really need is maybe not new script, what we really need is not to throw out scriptures, it's so much to continue to add to. So if we could, in the same way we're diversifying culture, if we could diversify sacred texts, I think we might be well served by that. So, that's why I continue to say, if we could make braiding sweetgrass a sacred text, that would, be really helpful to humanity at this point and give us other resources to draw from. But what we also need is a new theological imagination that is looking at these texts through the kind of theological lens that is in service to the common good. Thomas Aquinas was the first actually to use that phrase, the common good. And what he was saying in that is that that books that hold authority, or that the laws that we adopt, or the scriptures that we use to kind of provide guardrails, that from a Christian lens they always have to be in service to the common good. So if we could reread our scriptures through that lens and not the lens of, kind of this capitalist oppression lens that we've used for so long, then I don't know that our scriptures would be insufficient. I think we might find new gifts among them. And there are people doing this work. I don't want to diminish their contributions by any stretch. But I think there are a number of wonderful and sacred texts being produced at this very minute that should be added to our canonical libraries.
Thank you.
But I'm a heretic, so you all should not follow me.
Bill commented the greatest increase of the church was in the 50s when the Reformed quadrant was most in play. This way of considering things really helps to clarify the trends over the years. I see comments. I don't see any other questions. Pam Rocker says, in the past 10 years, the internet and social media has changed our lives dramatically. More than half the world now uses social media. 4.8 billion people around the world now use social media, and the average time spent using social media is 2.25 hours a day. We're going into the first generation of people who will not know life before social media. This has changed everything about how, when, where we get info and who we trust. The Big C church hasn't caught up with how this impacts the way we relate and the way we find spiritual communities that resonate with us. So I think that's talking about your technological trend. So do you have any comment there?
Yeah, Pam, I think that you're highlighting that for us is very prophetic, because I can't underscore how important it is that again, as wisdom bearers, there's a certain narrative, a certain story that we know could be told now that leads to a better world, a kinder and more compassionate and Christian world or just loving world in general. That story now needs to be told in those spaces. And the trouble is that our evangelical or our more conservative brothers and sisters in the faith here are mastering that. And so the stories that are getting told in those kinds of spaces are incongruent with the values that most of us on this call, I suspect, would hold. And those stories are also the ones feeding ChatGPT and feeding, all of these augmented and artificial intelligence tools that are coming out. So there's a real urgency at the moment for us to educate ourselves on the ways in which technology and the spaces where people are gathering using those tools are actually, because we're in the early days of these tools being developed, will fundamentally reshape our culture. I mean, imagine 50 years from now. So this is the one area we must not be behind the times. So go take courses. Good luck. Ask ChatGPT what we should do. Yep.
Pam, you're wearing a hat. I didn't recognize you.
I know. I was like, I got to put my camera on because I need to look at Cameron while she's answering me. But I was like, no one's going to know who this is. I promise there is hair under here.
Well, does anyone else have a question? MPT, did you just not put your hand down, or do you have a question?
I forgot to put it down. Sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah.
I assumed that was the case, but I didn't want to assume.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks. So it's been a pleasure to have you with us again, Cameron, and it was very thought-provoking and meaningful, and does draw to the forefront some of the themes that we talked about when we were together in I guess that was May. So it's great to have you back, and I know we'll not be strangers. So thank you very much. Cameron puts out some regular publications through her Convergence, so do encourage you to get on their mailing list because she sends out some fabulous reading and things that are very thought-provoking. So it's good spam to have coming into your inbox. So thanks. And as we depart from one another, blessings on you and on your ministries and on your leadership, blessings on your day, and look forward to being together again. Same time next month in the town hall. And as always, if there are questions or things you want to talk about with the region, just reach out. I see Vicki Nelson there, our stewardship person. Thank you for being with us, Vicki. Sorry, I didn't notice you earlier. All right.
Glad
Have
to
a
be
good
here.
day,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.